Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected, and if so, how did that go? My uncle was getting married. It was small, just a handful of family and a minister. I was videotaping. My grandmother was not into it at all. With each line spoken by the minister, she had a cutting, sarcastic response. I could not believe it, it was so unlike her. When that part came up, she said, "I object." "But does it really matter? They are going to do it anyway." The minister just ignored her and proceeded to do his work. They were divorced within a year. I wish I had a copy. I had a friend who was a minister, and I asked him if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was about a couple who was obviously in love. The bride was very smiley and happy. On the day of the wedding, she is stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this, and he asks if she is okay, to which she answered that she is fine. Right before the service he asks again, and he gets once again the same answer. He gets to the question, "Does anyone object to this union?" The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride's spot and says, "You're screwing him, you marry him," and then stormed out of the church. I know a guy that was the videographer at a wedding where the groom was the one that objected to the wedding at that point. When the priest asked if anyone objected, the groom broke down crying and said that he couldn't go through with the wedding. Apparently, he had gotten a stripper pregnant, and felt like he had to marry the stripper instead of the bride. He got pulled into a side room by the officiant, his father, and the father of the bride while everyone else, including the bride, stood around awkwardly. A few minutes later the father of the bride came out and told everyone that the ceremony was over, and the wedding was off, but that everyone was welcome to go to the reception and enjoy the food. My friend didn't stick around for the reception, so I have no idea how it all turned out, but apparently the bride was understandably not taking it well. A friend of mine has a band that plays lots of weddings and other parties. They were hired for a birthday party that turned out to be a surprise wedding. The guy surprised his GF with a proposal and wanted to have a wedding ceremony then and there. She said no and left. One of my cousins is married to literally one of the kindest and coolest dudes I have ever met. Before the wedding, her little sister, which was 9 years old, was saying how she's marrying my best friend. At the wedding, when the priest dude asks if anyone objects, the room is dead quiet and all you hear is a little girlish whisper. "I do." It was honestly really adorable, and we all laughed, and my cousin's husband and her little sister are still best friends. A woman, in her 20s at the time, objected to her mom marrying my uncle. She started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him!" during the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded and some family on the mom's side led the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her. My uncle was a lying, lazy bastard. The marriage didn't last. I don't know if it's a United Kingdom thing, or even just a one specific church thing, but I was told by the priest in a rehearsal that if someone objects, even as a joke, the priest is required to pause the ceremony and talk to the objector alone to discuss their concerns and decide if they have a valid objection. Like, it's not a fun jokey moment, it's a real legal part of the ceremony. He also said it used to be custom that if you raised an invalid objection, you then had to pay for the wedding. Not a wedding, but at a funeral someone objected to death. At my uncle's funeral, his ex-wife, and a local church leader, tried to raise him from the dead. We were all sitting there like normal people at a normal funeral, and she walks up to the casket and starts yelling, "James Lester, raise up!" I didn't know she was there, or I would have prepared myself for shenanigans. Also, I didn't know my uncle's middle name was Lester, so please imagine the confusion. So, she and the cult leader are literally yelling at my uncle's body. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself. They were escorted out. I've actually never told this story because it makes my family look insane. My mother passed away about 15 years ago. 5 years later my dad married my now stepmother. It was an outdoor wedding on a beautiful sunny day, and during the spot where they usually asked if anyone objects, a big gust of wind came out of nowhere and knocked over some tables. Afterward, multiple people came to tell me that wind gust was my mother objecting, which I like to believe was true. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long, throat clearing, which got everyone laughing. Everyone except for the bride's elderly Italian grandmother who marched out of her seat, and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him in Italian. A relative visited one ceremony where it was asked if anyone objects, and the groom decided it's a good time for a joke and said, "I do." The lady who was going to marry the couple just turned and left. They had to go through all the paperwork again and change the date. They got married, then divorced, in like 3 years if I remember correctly. I was the best man at my bestie's wedding. Someone that we tolerated in our friend group objected, and said he was in love with the bride and that he was the only one that could make her happy. She had been nice about his feelings until then, and reminded him in front of the entire ceremony that he couldn't hold down a job because he had too big of an ego, and he didn't get along with her friends because they all had something they were working on, and he had nothing, so he constantly tried to downplay their accomplishments on purely presumptuous ideas. She was way more thorough and crueler, and it was a hysterical 5-minute ordeal. I mean, he had it coming for starting problems at her wedding. He got up and left. I was pretty sure he was crying as he walked away, but no one went after him. It was both brutal and hilarious. He was like the Jar Jar Binks of our friend group. You hated him, but he made you feel better because at least you weren't as bad as Peter. Oldie but a goodie, this happened back in the 70s, this was shared to me by the guy who married my parents. It went something like this. "Does anyone object to this union?" "I do. That's my husband." So, they paused the wedding, the bride, the groom, and the woman objecting, went into a small room. The woman who objected provided documentation showing the groom was still legally her husband. Apparently, the couple had started divorce proceedings some time earlier but never finished. The wedding was cancelled, and everyone sent home. I was at one. I didn't know what happened as I was in the back. The bride ran out to the limousine, and her family ran after her. I asked the person next to me if she got cold feet. She was like, "Oh no, I thought this might happen, her ex is here." We went outside. He had apparently got a lot of money. He came to the side door in front of the church, and said he objected because he's rich and wants her back. She paused too long for the groom's liking, so he said, "Screw you both." Then she ran. Last I saw, her family was in the limousine with her. She was crying. I have no idea how it ended, but there was no wedding. We went to the reception party. We ate, drank, danced, and left. This will sound absolutely stupid, but when I was a kid, my deeply religious aunt had her wedding at a local church. During the objecting part, lightning struck very near the church. I remember to this day how the following thunder was so loud that the fancy windows of the church started rattling. Well, the timing of the strike was very unfortunate for my uncle because my aunt took this as a sign of a god objecting to her marriage and called the wedding off on the spot. Needless to say, they married on the same day, 1 year later, and this time without an objection from a god. They are still married to this day. My best friend, male, and I grew somewhat apart during college, then grew closer after college. He fell into a group of friends who were a little wilder than me. I don't blame him, college is supposed to be fun. I missed out. That's my fault, because I did a 5-year program that got me my BA and MBA in short order. After school ended, he was asked by a new friend to be his best man. I knew the guy and his fiancée secondhand. He was a bit of an ogre, and she was cute, a bit mousy. I wasn't at the wedding, but the big day comes, and we all go about our lives. It was the 90s and I worked that Saturday. I go out to our watering hole that night, and there was my best friend, drinking a double whiskey in a disheveled tux. "Good wedding? How was the reception, grub?" I asked. "No wedding, no reception, I ate dinner at Applebee's by myself," he said. The bride told the limousine driver to take her for a few big laps. She eventually showed, gathered her family around her, and told the groom it was not happening today or ever. The physical and mental abuse was too much, and she was too far into a drug habit he pushed on her, and was going to seek help. Now, understand, only a few at the wedding knew any of the abuse or drug abuse was going on. The ogre went into a rage, tried to attack her, and got repelled by the better men and women in the crowd. She got her help and self-confidence back and married a great guy a few years later. She has 3 kids and they have been together for almost 30 years. Her would-be husband kept up his bad habits and ended up doing some nasty things to his wife. This still shocks me to this day. My best friend has been pretty much straight and narrow since. It sobered him up in many ways. Well, sort of. It was staged, prearranged, and the minister was warned ahead of time. The couple said they wanted to make the ceremony more interesting. So, they had a friend object, declaring his love for the bride in an over-the-top dramatic speech. The best man stabbed the guy with a stage dagger, he played dead, and 2 of the other groomsmen dragged his limp body away. The wedding proceeded. I have to say, it was pretty awesome. The bride and groom are still happily married 30 years later.